Some people think that only the strong survive, but the more I observe stories like Minsu's, the more I realize that sometimes it is actually the opposite. Those who suffer the most are not the weak, but those who never had permission to be strong. And maybe that is why his trajectory bothers so many people. It exposes a kind of pain that a lot of people prefer to pretend they do not feel. Because, let's be honest, who has never tried to run away from their own mind? Who has never made an impulsive choice just to ease something that was hurting inside? Life charges a high price when we do not face our own monsters, and Minsu is almost a mirror of that. He did not enter the game to win, he entered to escape. But running has a cost that always arrives sooner or later. And the most curious part is that even in such a brutal environment, his real battle was not against other players. It was against himself, against fear, against that feeling of always being one step smaller than what the world demands. And if you look closely, it is impossible not to wonder how many times we also act like this without noticing. If you are a fan of cinema, psychology, and want to understand the mind behind your favorite character, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss any video. But before that, comment below which character you want me to analyze here on the channel. Now, let's go to the video. Minsu always seemed like the type of guy who goes unnoticed in a crowd, but not because he lacks personality. It is more because of this slightly withdrawn vibe, almost as if he shrinks himself to fit into a world that was never kind to him. He grew up learning early that speaking louder does not mean being heard, and you can feel that his entire life was built on accumulated small fears. Fears that, when we do not resolve them, turn into monsters under the bed. The point is that Minsu never had space to breathe. Before the games, he already carried a heavy history of impulsive choices and attempts to numb his own mind. The drug addiction came almost like a fake hug, the kind that promises relief but charges a high price in the end. And when the routine becomes a cycle of escape, relapse, and guilt, the guy starts to believe he does not deserve much more than that. This silent thought eats a person from the inside, right? He enters the Squid Game, not out of courage, but out of despair. And that changes the entire tone of his journey. While many people arrive trying to reclaim their lives, Minsu arrives trying to escape his. The difference is brutal when we look closely. It is as if he were in a leaking boat, rowing just to avoid sinking for good. Minsu has always felt too small, as if the world were adult-sized and he had remained at a child's scale. This feeling of inadequacy gives anyone the impression of always being late, and inside the games, that screams louder than ever. He does not have the confidence to take up space, nor the coldness to defend himself when needed, and that is when others notice. But the most curious thing is that despite all the fear, Minsu never became a bad person, just someone too tired to face everything. Many people identify with this kind of sensitivity because not everyone is born to solve their problems with brute force. Some people cope through hope, even if fragile, and Minsu tried to survive that way. His story has that emotional texture that many people feel but never say out loud. Like when you know you need to change something in your life but do not have the energy to start. And you keep going, pushing things forward, imagining that maybe tomorrow will be different. But tomorrow never comes, and he ended up entering the game precisely because his tomorrow collapsed. And even so, there is something very human in the way he faces that absurd scenario. He does not try to look strong, does not try to fake self-control. He simply exists there, trying not to be crushed by his own mind while running from physical danger. It is almost painful to see how fear makes decisions for him, who has never gone through something like that, right? And if there is one thing his arc makes clear, it is how the past never truly stays behind when we do not resolve certain things. Minsu carries his pain like someone carrying a backpack that is too heavy for a long road. And this backpack becomes harder and harder to hide as the games advance, opening space for the next chapter of this journey that only gets more intense. The fear that paralyzes. Fear has always clung to Minsu like that shadow that insists on following us even when the sun is shining bright. He was not born a coward, he just learned all his life that the world is too dangerous to trust, and that shapes anyone, right? Inside the games, this fear becomes almost its own character, breathing down his neck. You can feel how each of his steps seems calculated by pure panic. It feels like Minsu lives in a constant state of alert, like someone who expects the worst even when nothing is happening. He looks around, tries to predict tragedies, imagines risks that do not even exist yet, and that makes everything much harder. When the mind believes it is always in danger, the body does not know how to relax. It is like trying to run a marathon with a backpack full of emotional stones. This fear also makes Minsu doubt himself all the time. He never believes 100% in his own ability, and that becomes a silent saboteur. You know when you think, "I will do this," and 2 seconds later your head says, "Do not even try. It will go wrong." He lives that on repeat. And inside a deadly game, this inner voice becomes a sentence before any challenge even begins. The heaviest part is that his fear is not only rational, it is physical. It takes over his body, locks his breath, makes his hands sweaty, his mind race. And when the body enters this survival mode, decisions come out completely crooked. Have you noticed how when we are afraid, we make choices we never would on a normal day? Minsu is practically the embodiment of that, and there is something deeply human in this vulnerability. It is not weakness, it is a way of functioning that many people do not admit they have. The difference is that in his case, the environment amplifies everything. The games do not give space to reorganize emotions, do not give you time to breathe. It is like trying to think clearly while someone screams in your ear. There is no way. Fear also isolates Minsu from others. He cannot trust, cannot get close, because he believes everyone is a potential threat. That makes him look even more fragile, almost predictable. Emotionally stronger people notice this quickly. And when you are surrounded by people desperate for money and survival, being the weak link becomes a huge danger. The most curious thing is that if we look closely, this fear could be a strength. It could make him someone attentive, careful, strategic, but there is no balance. And when fear dominates everything, there is no room left to use these qualities in his favor. It is that thing. A little fear protects too much. Fear paralyzes. Minsu never found that middle ground. And this tension between surviving and freezing creates the perfect crack for others to notice and take advantage of. When someone sees you are afraid, it becomes easier to manipulate you. And it is exactly at this point that his story begins to tilt toward something darker. Because in the next conflicts, Minsu will discover what happens when fear is not only internal, but becomes a tool in the hands of other players. How Thanos and Namgyu take advantage of Minsu's fear. Thanos and Namgyu pick up on Minsu's fear almost instantly. It is the kind of reading dominant people make without even thinking too much. They notice that Minsu avoids eye contact, shrinks when someone talks louder, and hesitates before any decision. And in a game where everyone is trying to secure an advantage, this becomes an invitation, an easy target stamped on his forehead. Thanos uses an aggressive, direct posture that completely unravels Minsu. He speaks firmly, takes up space, gestures big. It even seems like he was born knowing that intimidation guarantees power. And Minsu, already used to yielding, automatically shrinks even more. It is that moment when we can almost feel the dynamic forming, who commands and who obeys. Namgyu, on the other hand, uses a more subtle manipulation. He does not need to shout, he just throws out friendly-sounding phrases, but always with a hidden intention. Things like, "Stay here with me," "It is safer," or "Let me think for you." This kind of talk looks like help, but it is only emotional control. Minsu, afraid of messing up, ends up relying too much on this pseudo-friend. The two work like a yin-yang of oppression. While Thanos suffocates with imposition, Namgyu seduces with false protection. Minsu gets stuck between wanting to run and wanting someone to guide him. It is that feeling many people have lived. When we are fragile, any stronger voice sounds logical. Any outstretched hand looks like salvation, even when it is not. This dynamic creates constant tension inside him. He knows he is being used, but he does not know how to get out. It is like being in an emotional maze where every exit seems to lead to yet another trap. And when someone is fragile, even recognizing they are being manipulated already hurts. Imagine then trying to react in the middle of a deadly game. And what no one sees is that behind this submission, there is a guy who just wanted to survive without causing trouble to anyone. But in this brutal universe, whoever tries to be invisible ends up being devoured first. And it is at this point in the journey that his conflicts start getting worse. especially when addiction enters as an attempt to escape all this pressure. The thing about Minsu stealing Namgyu's drugs and using that to kill him in the rope-jumping game is one of the most cruel and revealing moments of the character. It is not just random villainy, it is proof that he had already crossed that invisible line where survival turns into total coldness. The guy sees the game not as a competition, but as a board where each piece is disposable, and that says a lot about who he became after so much trauma, marginalization, and violence. What hits hard is that the drug theft is not just theft, it is calculation. Minsu observes, understands Namgyu's vulnerability, takes what he needs the most, and turns it into a weapon. In the rope game, this choice becomes a sentence. He does not push, he does not shout, he does not hit. He lets the guy fall on his own, intoxicated, disoriented, unable to stand. This coldness weighs more than any physical blow. And the most ironic part is that the audience of the game thinks everything is fair, as if it is just another match. But for Minsu, that round is almost a reflection of the real world. Whoever has the advantage first survives. Whoever gets attached dies. He internalized this so deeply that he no longer notices the level of cruelty in his actions. In the end, this scene serves to show exactly where he is emotionally, distant, hardened, and with no room for guilt. A guy who has already lost so much that he believes that if he falters for even 1 second, he becomes the next victim. And that does not justify, but fully explains. Minsu's death is not only physical, it is almost symbolic. He reaches the breaking point. That moment when the body collapses before the mind even understands what is happening, and deep down, you can feel that he had been dying little by little since the first game. Too much fear, too much manipulation, too much withdrawal. An exhausted mind cannot sustain a body at war. In his final game, Minsu is completely drained. His eyes reveal a fatigue that goes beyond the physical. You know that look of someone who has already given up before even losing? He carries that. And when the challenge requires courage, focus, and instinct, fear does what it always does. It paralyzes. The body hesitates for 1 second, and inside the Squid Game, 1 second is all it takes. The cruelest part is that Minsu does not die from lack of intelligence or talent. He dies from lack of emotional structure, that feeling of never being enough, of always being 2 steps behind, of not having the strength to face anything. It is life charging a bill he had been carrying long before the games. A bill no one taught him how to pay. Actually, what kills Minsu is the sum of everything he tried to hide. His addiction opens, cracks, his anxiety grows, his low self-esteem destroys any chance of reaction. When someone grows up without support, without affection, without safety, the world becomes a minefield. And in the Squid Game, each mine really explodes. He just stepped at the wrong time, in the wrong place, as he always did. The manipulation from Thanos and Namgyu also weighs on the ending. They consumed the little emotional energy he still had. And when you live suffocated between fear and submission, your mind does not see exits. Minsu saw no possibilities. He only saw threat, only danger, only the certainty that no matter what he did, he would be destroyed. And this belief shaped his final steps. There is something deeply sad in the fact that Minsu never fought for himself, not because he did not want to, but because no one taught him how to fight. He always sought external protection, always looked for someone stronger to follow, always tried to disappear to avoid trouble, and living faded comes with a price. In the Squid Game, that price arrives fast. His death causes emotional impact precisely because it is silent, without glory, without heroic resistance. It is real, human, common. It is the kind of fall many people experience in life. It is not a sudden disaster, it is accumulation. He does not fall off a cliff. He collapses little by little, and watching that awakens in many people that inner fear of also losing themselves in their own emotions. And ironically, his end opens an important reflection, because Minsu's trajectory almost looks like a distorted mirror of our own escapes, insecurities, and unresolved stories. He shows how when life tightens, we choose paths that seem to offer relief, but only tighten even more. And the most curious thing is that this only makes sense when we look at what happens to the other players after him. Minsu's personality is not born fragile, it becomes fragile. Everything he lived before the game was already pushing him toward this posture of always shrinking. And when someone grows up believing the world is too big and they are too small, every choice becomes a minefield. He does what he always did, tries to survive, causing as little friction as possible, and this in the games becomes almost a sentence. Fear shapes his decisions more than any rational strategy. It is not that he does not know what he needs to do, he just cannot do it. His mind is so conditioned to panic that any step becomes a huge effort. Have you noticed how, when we live insecure for a long time, even obvious choices feel risky? With him, this feeling is multiplied to the extreme. The manipulation from Thanos and Namgyu intensifies this trait. When you spend your life giving in, it becomes easy to believe that someone stronger knows what they are doing. It is an emotional pattern that repeats itself. He follows whoever speaks louder, even when his intuition screams to do otherwise. And this shapes his emotional path, always inclined to obey and never to lead. He does not choose, he merely reacts. Addiction also influences his way of existing. It shapes how he deals with pain, frustration, and fear. Instead of facing, he runs. Instead of processing what he feels, he tries to silence it. This emotional habit prevents him from maturing his decisions. Escape becomes the pattern, and whoever lives running cannot build solid choices. It is like trying to drive with a fogged-up windshield. His death only happens because his choices come from a destroyed emotional place. He cannot see his possibilities because the world always seems like a threat, and when the mind works under that logic, we always make choices too small for problems too big. Minsu lives in this automatic mode. Avoid risk, seek protection, try not to bother. All this forms the backbone of his actions. These factors also shape the image he has of himself. He does not see himself as capable. He does not recognize himself as strong, so he acts according to this belief. Because emotionally, we act as what we believe we are. If he sees himself as weak, he chooses like someone weak. If he sees himself as small, he avoids any big movements. His identity is what drives his choices, and this is where his story touches something very human. Because many people live repeating old emotional patterns without realizing they are on autopilot. Everyone has a bit of Minsu, that tendency to shrink when we should assert ourselves, to ask for permission when we could decide, to seek quick relief even knowing it will weigh later. He just lives this on an extreme scale. And when we look at everything he lived, it becomes clear that his trajectory is not just about a fragile player in a deadly game. It is about how unresolved experiences shape the way we think, feel, and choose. And the most unsettling part is realizing that the other players also carry their own monsters, which begin to appear strongly after Minsu's fall. After all this, tell me, what hit you the hardest in Minsu's story? Did it make you see some part of yourself that might have been hidden, or bring you a new way of looking at these characters? I am always curious to know what each person takes from this kind of analysis, because the way we interpret a character says a lot about how we interpret life too. And of course, I already want to know which character you want me to analyze in the next video. Is there someone you keep wondering what goes on in this creature's head? You can send it without fear, because these psychological layers are what make everything more interesting. Before leaving, make sure to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. That way you keep diving with me into these analyses that go beyond the surface and in the process help you see your own story with more clarity.